The can tilted slowly, deliberately. Regional Director Phil Granger held it over Vanessa Cole's head, the way a man holds something when he wants everyone watching to understand that he can. Thumb and forefinger, casual, the posture of authority performing itself for an audience. 21 employees in the Meridian Group's open-plan floor had gone still. The Mountain Dew hit her hair first, then her collar, then the fabric of the blazer she had ironed that morning at 6 a.m., before her commute. The ice followed. Phil laughed. Two people near the window laughed too, reflexively, the way people laugh when the person with the power laughs and the cost of not laughing feels too high. Vanessa sat completely still. Her hands were flat on her desk. Her jaw was set. She did not move, did not speak, did not give Phil Granger the reaction he had calculated on and telegraphed to the room as the point. Later, she would say that the stillness was not performance. It was decision. She was deciding something. She was still deciding it when, 45 minutes later, the lobby security desk called upstairs to say that her husband had arrived and was asking for her. And the security guard used two words that made Phil Granger's face go the color of the marble floor below them. Start at the beginning. Start with who she is. Vanessa Cole had taken the regional accounts manager position at Meridian Group 3 years ago for a reason she told very few people. She was bored. At 39, she had spent 11 years building the financial analysis and compliance division at Hartwell Capital, a mid-sized private equity firm where she had arrived as an analyst and risen through the specific combination of precision and persistence that defines people who are genuinely exceptional at what they do. To Senior Director of Risk and Compliance, she had built a team of 14. She had redesigned the firm's compliance architecture twice, the second time preemptively, 18 months before a regulatory change that her redesign had already anticipated. She had been, for 11 years, competent in a way that the institution recognized but didn't fully see. The particular invisibility of a person who does their work so well that the work appears to happen on its own. She had left Hartwell when the managing director who had championed her promotion retired, and his replacement made it clear, in the specific language of institutional reshuffling, that the direction of the division would be changing. The language was neutral. The implication was not. She had taken her severance, taken 3 months, and then taken the Meridian role, because a college friend on the inside had described it as a place where someone with her skills could build something real. The salary was a step down from where she'd ended at Hartwell. She had not told anyone that. She had not told anyone a lot of things. What nobody at Meridian knew, what Phil Granger specifically did not know, had never thought to ask, had never considered asking, was anything meaningful about Vanessa Cole's life outside the building. Colleagues knew she was married. They knew her husband's name was Leonard. They knew she sometimes mentioned him briefly in the way married people briefly mention spouses in office small talk. They did not know what Leonard Cole did for work. Phil Granger had never asked. It had never occurred to him that the answer would be relevant. Leonard Cole was the chairman and chief executive officer of Apex Capital Partners, a private equity firm with $4.2 billion in assets under management, offices in New York, Chicago, and London, and a portfolio of 17 active investments across financial services, logistics, and technology. He had founded Apex at 34 with a former colleague and 2 investors who believed in him before the market did, and he had spent the 14 years since making the kind of returns that generated the kind of reputation that meant his calls were returned the same day. He was 44 years old. He was known in the industry as meticulous, patient, and unimpressed by the performance of authority, a man who had sat across from a great many impressive rooms and found that the rooms were less impressive than they believed themselves to be. He and Vanessa had been together since graduate school. She had watched him build Apex the way he had watched her build the compliance division at Hartwell, with admiration and the specific understanding of a partner who knows the daily cost of what the external results don't show. They were each other's closest counsel. They did not advertise this. They moved through their professional lives as separate people who happened to be married, which was true, and who happened to understand each other's industries with the depth of someone who had been paying close attention for 17 years, which was also true and which neither of them mentioned unless asked. Phil Granger had never asked. Phil Granger had been regional director at Meridian Group for 6 years and had acquired in those 6 years The specific confidence of a man who has been the most senior person in a room for long enough to have stopped noticing that rooms have different kinds of authority in them. He was 48. He had an MBA from a school he mentioned regularly. He drove a car that cost more than 3 of his employees' annual salaries combined, and he had parked it in the reserve director's space for 6 years without once considering that the space communicated something to the people who had no space, which was everyone else. He was not malicious in the dramatic sense. He was careless in the specific way that men who have never experienced consequences for carelessness become careless, completely, structurally, as if the laws of cause and effect had issued him a personal exemption. He ran his floor the way he ran everything, loudly, with the assumption that volume and authority were the same thing. He had favorites, and he was not subtle about having them. He had blind spots, and he was not aware of having them, which was the more dangerous of the two categories. He told jokes that required other people to absorb them and called this bonding. He had done the soda thing twice before, once with a junior analyst named Marcus who had laughed nervously because he'd calculated correctly that laughing was the safer response, and once with a woman named Karen from accounting who had cried quietly in the bathroom and then said nothing because she'd been at Meridian for 8 months and couldn't afford to lose the job. He had done it to Vanessa because she'd been at Meridian long enough that he'd assessed her as safe, meaning he'd read her patience and her competence and her refusal to engage as performative authority as accommodation, and he had mistaken accommodation for submission. This was his central error. He would not understand it as an error for another 45 minutes. Vanessa sat at her desk with the soda soaking into her blazer and made the decision she had been moving toward for 3 years in the particular unhurried way that patient people move toward decisions they have been building evidence for. She had a folder on her personal laptop, encrypted, organized 3 years in the making, that documented 31 incidents. Not dramatic incidents, the small systematic ones that HR departments are designed to minimize and legal teams are trained to dismiss. The client meetings she had been excluded from, the credit that migrated from her analyses to Phil's presentations, the performance review that rated her communication skills as needing development in the same quarter. 3 external clients had sent written compliments about her work, specifically to Phil's supervisor. The compensation data she had cross-referenced against 2 male colleagues at equivalent tenure and found a gap she had then cross-referenced against Meridian's own pay equity statement on their public website, and found a contradiction. The documented pattern across 31 incidents over 3 years of a regional director who managed the women on his floor differently from the men, not dramatically, not with anything a single incident could sustain alone, but systematically in the way that systems are revealed only when you have enough data points to show the line. She had been building the line. She had been waiting for the anchor. The soda was the anchor. She took her phone from her bag and sent a text message to her husband. 4 words. I need you here. Then she sent a second message to the employment attorney she had retained 2 months ago, who had reviewed the folder and said, when she described what she was waiting for, when it happens, make sure there are witnesses. She replied to the attorney with 3 words, 21 witnesses. Then she went to the bathroom and cleaned up what she could clean up, and she came back to her desk. And she continued working with the focused steadiness of someone who has just started a clock and knows exactly how long it will run. Leonard arrived 43 minutes later. He had been in a meeting on the 14th floor of a building 6 blocks away. Close enough that I need you here meant something specific, and he understood what it meant without additional explanation, which was one of 17 years of paying attention made material. He told his assistant he'd be back within the hour. He came directly. He walked through Meridian Group's lobby at 2:38 p.m. in a charcoal suit that had not come from anywhere Phil Granger could have afforded, and he approached the security desk and said his wife's name. The security guard, a man named Harold who had worked the desk for 11 years and knew everyone who came through the building, including their employers and their titles because the building's tenant directory was his operational Bible, looked up from his screen. He had logged Leonard Cole in twice before, once 18 months ago for a holiday event and once 8 months ago for an emergency that had turned out to be a false alarm. He had, on both occasions, looked up the name in the visitor log and cross-referenced it with the tenant directory the way he did with everyone. He knew who Leonard Cole was. Mr. Cole, Harold said, reaching for the visitor badge. Good afternoon. I'll let Mrs. Cole know you're here. Phil Granger was standing near the front of the floor, near enough to the phone at the administrative assistant's desk to hear the call go through. He was still in the elevated mood that the soda incident had produced in him, the mood of a man who has performed dominance for his team and feels the room has registered it correctly. Harold's voice came through the desk speaker, because the assistant had it on speaker, as she always did in the afternoons. "This is Harold at the front desk. I have the chairman here for Mrs. Cole." Phil Granger's mood relocated. "The chairman," his assistant repeated, already reaching for the phone. "Mr. Leonard Cole," Harold confirmed, with the particular enunciation of someone who has held a desk for 11 years and understands that precision is the job. "Chairman and CEO, Apex Capital. Here for Mrs. Vanessa Cole." The floor absorbed this information in the specific way that 21 people absorb information that reorganizes everything they thought they understood about the last 3 years. It moved through the open plan the way a temperature change moves through a room. Not announced, just present, and then undeniable. 3 people looked at Phil. Phil looked at the elevator doors. His face had passed through several expressions and arrived at the one that faces arrive at when certainty is removed from under them without warning. The elevator opened. Vanessa stepped out, changed into the spare blazer she kept in her bottom drawer for emergencies. She'd bought it 6 months ago. In the specific way that someone in the process of building a record prepares for the anchor, she crossed the lobby to her husband. He looked at her face. He looked at her damp collar, the faint discoloration at her hairline where the ice had been. He said nothing in public that the room could hear. He put his hand briefly on her arm. She gave him the signal they'd established in 17 years of partnership. A slight nod, the one that meant, "I have this handled. I need you visible." He nodded back. He understood. They stood together in the lobby as Phil Granger came off the elevator. Phil had straightened his jacket on the way down. He had deployed the expression he used for donor meetings and client presentations, the managed authority of a man who has been told he presents well, and has leaned into the assessment. He extended his hand. "Mr. Cole," he said. "Phil Granger, Regional Director. Great to finally—" "I know who you are," Leonard said. His voice was exactly the temperature of the marble floor. Not warm, not aggressive, simply precise. The voice of a man who had sat across from a great many people who believed the name and the handshake would do the organizational work, and who had learned to let the silence after the handshake do its own work instead. He did not take the hand. Phil Granger's extended hand became a brief, unresolved gesture that he pulled back with the specific self-consciousness of someone who has just understood that the room they walked into is not the room they prepared for. "I've heard a great deal about how this floor is run," Leonard said. "My wife has kept very thorough records." He glanced at Vanessa. "I understand there's a folder." Vanessa opened her bag. She placed the employment attorney's business card on the lobby desk. She looked at Phil Granger with the same expression she had worn when the soda hit her hair. Not anger, not satisfaction, something more complete than either. The expression of a woman who had been deciding something for 45 minutes and had finished deciding. "I'll be out for the rest of the week," she told him. "My attorney will be in touch Monday." She and Leonard walked out through the lobby doors into the afternoon. Harold at the security desk watched them go. He returned to his terminal. He had been at that desk for 11 years. He had seen a great many things come through the building's doors. He would later say, to the colleague who asked him about it, that in 11 years he had never watched a lobby rearrange itself so completely in under 4 minutes. The employment attorney filed suit on Wednesday. The complaint named Phil Granger individually and Meridian Group institutionally. It cited 31 documented incidents. It included the compensation analysis with the pay equity contradiction. It included the performance review alongside the client commendation letters. It included, among the supporting materials, the statements of 9 colleagues who had witnessed incidents over the preceding 3 years and who had been in the 2 days since the lobby willing to say on record what they had not been willing to say before. The incident with the soda can was listed in the complaint under a subsection the attorney had titled, "With the dry precision of someone who had written a great many complaints and understood that language could be neutral and devastating simultaneously. Pattern, culmination." Meridian Group's legal team contacted the attorney within 48 hours. Phil Granger was placed on administrative leave the same day. The settlement discussions that followed were private and resolved in 6 weeks. The terms were not disclosed, per the agreement, but Vanessa Cole left Meridian Group on the last Friday of the month, and began a transition period before joining the firm she had been building toward. A compliance and risk advisory practice she had been quietly planning for 2 years, structured around the kind of work she had been doing for 3 years at Meridian and 11 before that at Hartwell. But this time on her own terms, for clients who retained her specifically and whose institutions benefited from her work in ways that could not be reassigned to someone else's presentation. Leonard sent flowers to her first office on the first day, not a large arrangement. One clean bouquet with a card that said, in his handwriting, 17 years. I know what this cost. I know what it's worth. She put the card in the folder, the encrypted one, the 3-year record, not because she needed it there, but because it seemed like the right place for the thing that was most true. Phil Granger left Meridian Group on a Friday 3 weeks after his administrative leave began. The announcement, distributed to staff by the company's HR director, cited a mutual decision regarding professional direction. No further details were provided. No gathering was held. The director's parking space sat empty for 2 months before it was reassigned. Marcus, the junior analyst who had laughed nervously 18 months ago when Phil did the soda thing to him, was promoted 6 months later to a senior analyst role. Not because of what had happened, not directly, but because the reorganization of the floor that followed Phil's departure produced a new regional director who read the team's actual work product rather than the performances of it. And Marcus's work product had been exceptional for 3 years. And now, finally, someone was reading it. He found out about the promotion on a Thursday afternoon. He called his mother from his car in the parking garage. He sat there for a while with the phone in his hand after the call ended, not quite ready to go back in yet. He was thinking about the day with the soda can, his version of it, a year and a half earlier, and the laugh he had produced at the cost of something he hadn't been able to name then and could name now. He was thinking about Vanessa Cole's hands flat on the desk, the stillness, the decision happening behind her eyes. He had not known at the time what she was deciding. He understood it now. Vanessa Cole's advisory practice opened its doors on a Monday in March, in a building 4 blocks from Meridian and 11 blocks from Hartwell, and 2 floors above an excellent coffee shop that she visited every morning before the workday started. At the round corner table by the window where she could see the street, she had 4 clients in the first month, 8 by the third. The practice's work was not loud, it was not visible from the outside. It was the kind of work that happened inside institutions and made them function better and safer and more equitably. And its results showed up in audit reports and regulatory reviews and the reduced frequency of exactly the category of incident that a certain kind of floor culture produces when nobody is paying careful enough. Attention. She was paying attention. She had always been paying attention. That had been, from the beginning, the thing Phil Granger had looked at and failed to read correctly. He had seen a woman at a desk, patient and contained, and he had concluded that patient and contained meant manageable. He had not understood, had never been given reason to understand, until the lobby, that patient and contained was sometimes what it looked like when someone was building something that would outlast the room they were sitting in. Leonard picked her up for lunch on Fridays, when their schedules allowed. He drove himself, not a car service, not an Escalade, his own car. The practical one that his assistant teased him about because it had 160,000 miles on it and the CEO of a $4 billion firm could afford something newer. He said the car worked fine. He said he had things that were more important to spend money on. He parked in the visitor spot and came up the stairs and knocked on the glass door of the practice's small reception area. And the receptionist he'd hired in month 2, a young woman named Gloria who had applied to 12 jobs after being laid off and whom Vanessa had hired because her cover letter had said simply, "I'm thorough, I'm early, and I pay attention to things other people miss," let him in and told him Vanessa was just finishing a call. He sat in the reception chair and waited. He was good at waiting. He had always been good at waiting. Some people understood early that the long view was the only view worth having. And those people moved through the world with a specific kind of patience that was not passivity but its opposite. The patience of someone building towards something, taking the time the thing required, refusing to let urgency compress what needed to be allowed to develop at its own pace. Vanessa came out of her office with her coat already on. She saw him in the chair. She smiled the specific smile that is reserved in long marriages, for the moment you see your person in an unexpected place and feel, for just a second, the specific gratitude of their continued existence in the world. Ready? She said. Then ready, he said. They went out into the March afternoon, the practice behind them, the city around them, everything they had each built by the specific refusal to be diminished by the rooms that had tried to diminish them, and walked down the 4 blocks to the place they'd been meaning to try for 3 weeks, where they sat by the window and ordered and talked about their weeks and did not think about Phil Granger, who was somewhere else entirely now, in a smaller room with fewer people paying attention. Some people spend their whole lives building the wrong thing. Some people spend their whole lives watching. The difference in the end is simply this: one of them knows what they're looking at.